Okay, so in this video, we are going to be looking at how vision occurs, or at least part of the process. And so in order to do that, we need to understand the various components of the eye and the role that they play. So the first thing is that when light waves enter the eye, they first cross the cornea, which is the clear outer layer of the eye. And then behind the cornea, we have the iris and the pupil. So the iris is the colored part of the eye, and then the pupil is that little black part in the middle. So once the light waves have crossed the cornea, they will enter the eye through the pupil, and attached to the iris are muscles which can contract and relax, and therefore they are able to allow the pupil to change size and control the amount of light that's entering the eye. So in the dark, those muscles relax, which allows your pupils to expand, and therefore more light can enter the eye. Now, behind the pupil is then the lens. And so this, along with the cornea, has the job of focusing the incoming light waves towards the back of the eye. However, this can actually also change shape, but for a different reason. The reason that it changes shape is to adjust for objects that are either close up or far away. So right now, you are looking at your computer screen, but if I ask you to hold a pen up close to your eyes and look at it, your lens would need to change shape to accommodate for that change in focus. This is actually called accommodation. I won't test you on that term, but just so you know, when the lens is changing shape to accommodate for that change in focus, that is called accommodation. Now, once the cornea and the lens have focused the light waves to the back of the eye, they reach what is called the retina. And so this is where the sensory receptors in the eye are, and those are called photoreceptors. We're going to look at those on the next slide. But basically, photoreceptors will become activated once they pick up those light waves, and they'll then send that information to other cells. You don't need to know what those other cells are for this class, but just be aware there are other layers of cells that message gets passed on to. And then the axons of those cells connect at the back of the eye, and they create the optic nerve. So remember that a nerve is a bundle of axons. And so the axons from these cells are bundling together to create this optic nerve, and that is what carries that visual information from the eye to the brain. Okay, and so we're actually going to come back to this in a second. But let's talk about photoreceptors. So on the back of the eye, where the retina is, we have millions of these receptors called photoreceptors. And these are specialized neurons, and their job is to absorb the light energy and turn that into electrical and chemical signals. So if you remember from one of the earlier videos, that process is called transduction. Okay, so the photoreceptors are where transduction occurs for vision. They take those light waves and they transform that into neural energy. They transform it into the language that the brain understands. And there are two types of photoreceptors that you need to know. The first are rods, which are involved in nighttime vision. So these work best in very low light conditions. They're very highly sensitive, which obviously they need to be to allow us to see in low light. They are also involved in the perception of movement in our peripheral vision. So if you look here at the eye, and this is the retina at the back, you've got the rods in the periphery of the retina, okay? And because of that, that's how we can see movement in our periphery. So right now, if you were to stick your arms out to the side and look forward, okay, so you're not looking directly at your hands, but if you wiggle your fingers, you can see that out of the corner of your eye. You can see that movement, and that is because of our rods. Now, our cones are then involved in our daytime vision. So this is what becomes activated in bright lights or in daylight. And they're involved in high acuity color information. So what I mean by that is they allow us to see things in a lot of detail, and they allow us to see in color. So we're also going to talk a bit more about that on the next slide, but the way that I remember this, and you will want to remember this on the exam, that cones are involved in color, is C for cones, C for color. That's how I remember that. Now, part of why they allow us to see in so much detail is because the majority are located in the fovea. So I'm going to go back to this. Here's the fovea, this little point at the back on the retina. Most of the cones are kind of squished together in this little area. So when an image falls on the fovea, because of the cones that allow us to see in detail, we can see that particular part of the image in a lot of detail. Now, while we're here, I said I'd come back to this. So this point here, where the optic nerve leaves the eye, there actually aren't any photoreceptors where that happens. Now, remember that photoreceptors, their job is transduction, right? They're transforming light waves into an energy that can be uh, um, communicated throughout the brain and allows us to see. So as a result, anything that falls on that part of the eye, we can't actually see. This is known as a blind spot in our eye. We cannot see anything that falls on that part. Now, you don't notice that when you're looking at things. We don't walk around with these blind spots in our vision because our brain will fill in the information. It fills in that gap. And you can actually experience this. I was going to show you how to do this, but perhaps I'll create another video showing you how. Or you can even Google blind spot demonstration. But let me see if I'll describe how this works. So you take a piece of white paper, and on kind of the left-hand corner, you draw a big dot. And then on the right-hand corner, you draw a cross. Okay? Then you hold that arm's length away from you. And so you want to be looking at the cross in the right corner, and then you want to cover up your right eye. So with your left eye, you are looking at the cross in the right corner of the page. Now, when you do that, you should probably still be able to see that dot, but if you move that paper closer, and it's going to vary between you, you might need to move it a lot closer, you might only need to move it a little bit closer, but eventually that dot will fall on the blind spot. And once it does, you'll know, because you won't be able to see the dot anymore. You'll be able to see the white paper, and basically your eye is filling in that blind spot with the white paper, because that's what's surrounding it. So yeah, maybe Google blind spot demonstration, or give it a go and see if you can experience what it's like when something falls on your blind spot. Okay, so moving on to theories of color. So there are two theories of color that I want you to know on the exam, and actually both have been supported, but for different parts of the eye. So the first is the trichromatic theory of color vision. This was proposed by Helmholtz, who believes that our eyes have three types of color receptors: red, green, and blue. So when we're talking about color receptors here, we are talking about cones. So we said we have three different types of cones: red, green, and blue, and that the color we see will depend on the activation of these cones. So when we're looking at something that's red, those light waves are being bounced off of that object, and when they hit those cones, once they reach the retina, it's the red cones that are becoming activated, and we therefore see the color red. If we are looking at something that's yellow, then both the green and the red cones are becoming activated, and we see yellow. And so what researchers found is this is true, but only for the cells in the retina. So only for those cones is this true. We have three types: red, green, and blue. The other theory is the opponent process theory, developed by Hering, and this was based on his work with after images, and we'll talk about that in a second. He also suggested that our eyes have three types of color receptors, but he also suggested that each receptor consists of a pair of opposing receptors, and so you have this this idea that color is coded in opponent pairs: black and white, yellow and blue, green and red. And the reason that he developed this theory is he was looking at after images, and he found that if you stare at any one of these colors for long enough, when you look away, you can still see that object. You get this after image of that object, but it will be the opposite color. And actually, I have a demonstration for this in a second. Basically, what's happening is, whatever color you're looking at, the receptors for that color are excited, and then the opponent color receptor becomes inhibited. So while you're looking at something green, the green receptors are excited, the reds are inhibited. And so then when you look away, those that have been inhibited suddenly become reactivated, and you suddenly see this after image in that color. I mean, again, this has also been supported, but this applies to the cells after the retina, so not the cones on the retina that we just discussed. This applies to those other cells. So to demonstrate this, I want you to stare at this for at least 30 seconds. You want to stare at this white dot, okay? And I'm going to do this with you, because I'm then going to switch to a white slide after, and when I do that, you will hopefully see the after image. You do want to stare at this for about 30 seconds, okay? Starting now. So hopefully what you saw, or what you're seeing, is that same flag, except the parts that were green should be either a pinkish, reddish, or a red color, and then the yellow should have become blue. And again, that's because while the green and yellow receptors were activated, the red and blue were inhibited, and so as you look away and they become reactivated, you suddenly see that after image. If you didn't see it, it may be because you didn't stare at the that white dot consistently. If you looked away or you blinked a lot, that may not have worked, but you have these slides so you can play around and try this again.